Does your faith feel disconnected from daily life? Discover Heaven Meets Earth, a visually stunning devotional by Josh Nadeau. Over 40 days, engage in prayer, reflection, and original art as you explore the Nicene Creed, ancient words that resonate today. This journey of spiritual formation merges beauty with timeless truth, helping you find God in everyday moments. Experience the richness of Christian belief with Heaven Meets Earth, available wherever books are sold.
The world is becoming increasingly proficient at telling stories that deny God. As such, we need Thinking Christian to become as natural as breathing. Welcome to the Thinking Christian podcast. I'm Dr. James Spencer. Through calm, thoughtful, theological discussions, Thinking Christian highlights the ways God is working in the world and questions the underlying social, cultural, and political assumptions that hinder Christians from becoming more like Christ. Now, on to today's episode of Thinking Christian. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Thinking Christian. I'm Dr. James Spencer, and I'm joined today by Dr. Jillian Ross. She's a professor of biblical studies at Liberty University, and she wrote an article for the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Study that we're going to be discussing today, as well as just discussing the book of Judges a little bit more generally. But the title of the article is Let Mercy Triumph Over Judgment, a Theology of Law in Judges. And I found the article really helpful and pretty fascinating. And you all know I'm an Old Testament geek anyway. So I thought it'd be a great idea to have Dr. Ross on to discuss this. So welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a joy to be with you. And it's always a joy to talk about Judges with a fellow Old Testament nerd.
Yeah, that's right.
Or whatever
right.
word you prefer to use.
Yeah, exactly. I really appreciated the article because I think it helped address some of the challenges that I think people have when they read through the book of Judges. I've done a fair amount of work on the Jephthah narrative. And so that narrative in and of itself, where Jephthah gives this vow that he's going to sacrifice his only daughter, if God, he doesn't actually vow that, but it ends up that way. He carries out this vow and you kind of sit back and you go, man, what's going on here? Like, it seems like such an ethical and theological dilemma. And I really feel like your article helps to frame this out a little bit. So maybe give a little bit of an introduction to what you're arguing in the article, and then we can talk a little bit more about some specific instances in Judges.
Sure. Thank you. So the article is addressing the fact that the book of Judges is showing kind of a decline of spirituality of its people, including its leaders. And then what's consistent, though, is God, that his character is merciful, and that as the book starts out, you see God acting mercifully in accordance with his word to the judges, to the Israelites. But then as the book kind of shifts, you start seeing the leaders like Gideon acting mercilessly and unaware of the scriptures. And so when you get to Jephthah, you're showing not only the ignorance of the law, but his lawlessness in it that doesn't jive not only with the plain reading of the story, like it's supposed to make you feel like what's going on, but that the Bible itself is teaching us to have a merciful posture that prioritizes human life and dignity.
Yeah, and I thought that was a really helpful way of framing the law. I think, you referenced Dan Block's perspective on this and the way he addresses the Torah. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about why this is important. So you have, I wouldn't say maybe you would, but like laws that stand in tension. And so you can imagine at some point, it's almost like if we brought it into a contemporary example, if you've got somebody in the car who's bleeding out, do you break the speed limit? And that's almost the sort of conundrum that you're trying to address here. Like, how do I care for a neighbor if I have to break a separate law? Like, where do these two meet and how do we resolve that tension? So maybe give a little bit of a introduction to that idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's actually commonplace in societies where you're going to have two things that are in contrast. And that's why we have judges. That's why we have like difficult cases that go to trial, is because you have two facets of a situation that aren't working well together. So, for example, in in the situation, we would say, of course, we want to speed to get that person to the hospital. Like you see that with when I was born, I was almost born in the car. So my dad was breaking the speed limit to get me there. And we barely made it. So praise God, I'm here today because my dad broke the speed limit. But we have other situations like Jephthah where he made a vow. It was quite ill-crafted because it said anything coming out of my house. And then you have a law basically that says don't sacrifice humans. And with that law, you get further clarification that it's an abomination. So despite popular belief, there really is a ranking, I would say, in the Old Testament of like what's particularly abhorrent to the Lord. And lack of dignity to human life is one of them. So then you kind of look at, well, what's competing? Do you want to sin by not fulfilling a vow, which is a very serious thing? You know, driving crazy over the speed limit is a very serious thing too. But trying to preserve a human life and getting to the hospital kind of outranks that. And so this is the same thing where the right thing to do for Jephthah would be to find a substitute. And we actually find that several times in scripture, in narratives. We have with Saul, he wanted to sacrifice or kill his son because he had eaten unknowingly.
That's right. Yeah.
And so what happens then is that the people, or you could maybe translate the army, they say, hey, wait, he was the deliverer, the human deliverer behind this war. So we have to, let's redeem him. And so they came up with a redemption solution.
Yeah, and sort of what's fascinating even about that narrative of Saul is you see these instances where Saul is constantly swayed by the people. And so the fact that the people are willing to redeem Jonathan speaks to, in that instance, at least their character, you know, that they're moving Saul towards something good. Normally they're moving Saul towards something kind of bad in the rest of the book.
Right.
And so you have these mixed motives. I mean, if we look at, I'll be honest, I mean, I thought through this a little bit with regard to Jephthah and this notion that Jephthah not keeping his vow very well could have had consequences for Jephthah, although it wouldn't have had consequences then for his daughter. And so there is a sense in which I'd always sort of thought of Jephthah as, you know, his ambition to get back to a place where he thought he should be and, you know, rule over Israel as judge, so clouded his judgment that he just goes through with it. And it's really an act of selfishness and, you know, all the bad things that you can think of to ascribe to somebody. That's what Jephthah is doing in that moment. I hadn't really thought of it in terms of Gideon. And you do a lot of work in that Gideon narrative. And so maybe give a little bit of a parallel to what goes on with that Gideon narrative after God, you know, does all these amazing things through Gideon and he whittles his army down and he gets the victory. And then Gideon turns almost sadistic.
Yeah. So if we think about the Gideon story, it's kind of two parts, an A and a B. Yeah. And the A part where we have our Sunday school stories, the best moments of Gideon, which I think are really positive, is where he's really good. And then it's almost sort of like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde because he starts flipping. And that's how the book works. The book has Gideon at the center, and he's also the theological center of the book. Not page-wise is he the center per se, but story-wise, he's the middle judge. And we end up having this pivot between fairly positive worship when the leader is with the Lord and fairly positive warfare and living. And then you go, and after that second half of Gideon, you start having like the negative warfare. So he's spoiler alert for those that haven't read that section of Gideon in a while. He does civil war and he tortures Israelites. And then he famously makes a cultic object, and all Israel, it says, prostitutes after it. So he leads Israel into a snare of somewhat false, or a technical term, synchronistic worship, where they're worshiping the right God wrongly. And so Gideon stands at a very interesting spot in that book for that reason. And then the next story is Jephthah. So not to get too much into the weeds, but what we see in the beginning part of the story is God. He goes to he goes to Gideon, and he's like, hey, go deliver Israel. And Gideon's like, hey, God abandoned us. And he doesn't realize that God is right there face to face with him. And then he is convinced. He has to purify the group. So he kills the Baal altar and the Asherah pole. So he's ritually desecrating them and exalting the Lord. And then at that point, it's so beautiful. I think it's often overlooked, is that God has Gideon, whose whole area was worshiping a false god. He honors them and lets them lead in the battle. They were just days ago wanting to kill Gideon because he tore down the Baal structure, but God is merciful, and he allows this conversion to lead into the battle. But Gideon, on the other hand, when he says, hey, you people on the other side of the Jordan, I'm pursuing the bad guys that have been oppressing us, they're like, we're not going on your side. When we'll give you food and we'll help you when you actually bring these people down. And he has no mercy for them. And he ends up saying, hey, you weren't on my side. I'm going to torture you. And I'm going to kill all these people in your town. He just didn't extend mercy like the Lord. So as the leader, when the storylines with what God was doing and what Gideon were doing were in line, Gideon doesn't act like God. And as leaders of God's people, that him and then we by extension as church leaders should do that as well. So, so then you just see Jephthah kind of acting selfishly and self-interest.
Americans have a big healthcare problem. Over 100 million citizens carry medical debt while paying for overpriced and complicated health insurance. As Christians, we don't have to pay for a broken system. Christian Healthcare Ministries is an alternative to health insurance at half the cost. Plus, you can enroll at any time. Stand up to health insurance with a biblical solution. Join CHM today by visiting chministries.org/wellness. That's chministries.org/wellness.
Faith shapes how we live, and it should shape how we steward our money too. That's why 316 Financial exists. We're an online bank created to help people align their finances with their faith and their values. At 316 Financial, 10% of our profits are given back to faith-based ministries, supporting work that makes a lasting difference. It's a simple idea. Everyday banking can be a powerful way to live generously, and you don't have to sacrifice quality to bank with purpose. 316 Financial offers modern online banking, no monthly fees, free ATM access nationwide, and competitive interest rates designed to help your money grow responsibly. Whether you're saving for the future, managing everyday expenses, or looking for a bank that reflects what matters most to you, 316 Financial makes it easy to bank with intention. Learn more and open an account today at bank316.com. Banking services are provided by 316 Financial, a division of Primis Bank, member FDIC.
One thing I've always found, a couple of thoughts. So, number one, this idea that, because the leaders aren't following through on God's mercy, I'm wondering, as I'm thinking through the Gideon and the Jephthah incident, and then I want to ask you about Samson at some point, but when you just look at the Gideon and the Jephthah incident, it feels like what's happening is both of them are stuck in a situation where they don't feel they have the option of loving neighbor. In other words, they're trying to achieve something for whatever reason. Then they both have their different motivations. But love for neighbor doesn't seem like it's going to help them accomplish what they want to accomplish. And so they completely abandon
That's well said.
it. Right. And so God, it's almost as if they forget God is there, which is really interesting and odd, I think, in both stories, because to your point, Gideon starts there, then he has this miraculous victory where it's clear that God is present with him. And then he sort of falls into this problem. Jephthah is odd because even though God goes silent, right, sort of the last narrative thing we hear from God is, you all wanted to worship your idols, why don't you go ask them for help? We as the readers know that God is going to help Israel. But Jephthah really does seem to know and narrates the history of God's deliverance to his enemy. And so it's like he's aware that God has delivered ongoing, but then feels like he has to make this vow almost because as he gets closer and closer to battle, he's going, oh man, I may not get this done. Yeah. Is that sort of a fair way to understand what's going on here? That absence of focus on the Lord, a lack of attentiveness to God and his presence is driving now both of these characters to do things that simply because they don't think love of neighbor is going to get them done.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation on that, James. I think you're right because the Spirit is already on Jephthah. The Spirit's come upon him when he makes the vow. And he kept saying, when the Lord delivers. So I think, I'm just going to go on a side note per sec. I think this is why he can be in the Hall of Faith and Gideon is as well. Because as William Lane says, at the critical moment, they have extraordinary faith. And so does Samson, that you can tear down an edifice. So at that point, like they have that part going, but the love of the neighbor is really not there. I think another scholar, Elias, he has a book entitled Self-Interest versus Communal Interest in these later narratives on Judges, and it's basically that point that they've lacked the communal part. What I think happened is they're untethered to the Word of God. And the Word of God in Leviticus is saying, love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God with all your heart. And so that's Deuteronomy. So when you lose those core facets and don't know those other parts of the law, and it seems like the other people don't or are careless to the fact, that's when things just go wrong.
And I find, you mentioned the Spirit coming upon Jephthah. I've had a number of conversations with students over the years as to why the Spirit comes upon Jephthah and then he makes the vow. And a lot of students that I've taught wanted to make a causal connection between the Spirit coming on Jephthah and then him making the vow. And my encouragement is, no, you actually should see this in a different way. It highlights that the vow is completely unnecessary. Right. The Spirit has come upon Jephthah to empower him to go and fight this battle, and he's going to win now. But Jephthah, in his zeal to get done what he's really looking to get done, I usually frame it as he's trying to piggyback. He's kind of, sort of tie his ambitions to what God is going to do anyway. He makes this vow. And I said, if you reverse those, if he made the vow and then the Spirit came on him, it would feel like a divine endorsement. But the way it's structured in the narrative, it's like, no, this is now just unnecessary. Is that how you'd kind of see that as well? Yeah, I read it that way as well, because in the other stories, you have the Spirit upon them too. And once the Spirit's upon the individual, they're impelled and they're successful. It wasn't like our time where we always have the Spirit. But I think going back to the student that you're talking to, one of the things I bring up with my students is, we have the Spirit, and sometimes we act in ways that are contrary, or we have leaders that were like, how did this scandal happen with this leader? And we forget that even though there's the Spirit, people can violate and quench the Spirit. That's not exactly what's happening there in Judges. But I think the order is important to show that it was unnecessary.
And people have been looking at this for centuries. I was just reading kind of a reception history and even in art of how this issue's been debated.
Interesting. So let me ask my Samson questions. So there's part of me, so Gideon torturing Israelites, right? Jephthah sacrificing his own kin. And then Samson pulling the pillars down, and crushing the I think I'm going to get this right. I've been in 1 Samuel a little too much, maybe Philistines. Am I right about that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Samson crushing the Philistines. I'm seeing that as a completely different thing because you're dealing with Israelites versus Philistines.
Right.
How do you view that with Samson? Because he does some really, Samson's just a crazy character anyway. Like he does a lot of different stuff. But how do you think about Samson from within this grid that you're providing?
So Samson, he also has self-interest because he's not interested in delivering Israel. So even when you read the text, at the end, he's like, let me tear this down to have vengeance on my eyes. Yeah. It's like all these people deserve to die because my eyes. And so God does it. I think here we see God's agenda is one thing, and the deliverer's agenda, the beginning of delivering, he's not into delivering, but God's going to use his request to fulfill his function, which was to show that he was more powerful than the other gods and accomplish the beginnings. And I think it's a really sad commentary because I think the real key is the Gaza story. It's only a few verses. That's where he goes to a prostitute in the middle of the night and then partially leaves. And then to show off, he breaks the gates and has it open. So I like to talk to my students and others and say, okay, if you know Lord of the Rings, you know the Battle of Helm's Deep. And you've got this orc, and he's got that torch, and he is charging. And what do you see? The whole, everything focuses on that. Because as soon as that gate comes, all the bad guys are going to storm the gate, and everybody's going to be sacked, is the normal process.
Yeah.
But what does Samson do? He goes to Hebron, and most of us are like, all right, he went to Hebron with the gates. And we think it's like just up the road. No, it's 40 miles as the crow flies. And so he never says, hey, everybody, let's storm the gates. Let's go in, let's deliver Israel. There's nothing. Do you know how many people would see him with those gates in 40 miles? I don't care how much of a Superman he is. Right. It's absurd. He so cares nothing for delivering Israel. So I think that shows the progression of just God's prerogatives, nothing. And in a similar story just beforehand, the Judites are like, hey, don't you know that the Philistines are controlled? They have no desire for, hey, Samson, do you want to try to deliver us? You're pretty strong. Either. So there's just no interest in God there. And it's culminated in, I want to destroy these people for my eyes. Yeah.
It's such a weird, Samson does exhibit almost like that nth degree of selfishness, even though he's probably one of the more powerful judges that you see. He's got this extraordinary strength. It's really interesting. But ultimately, I agree. He doesn't seem to care about much of anything. And so the fact that he ends up destroying the Philistines at the end, do you see that as maybe quasi-ironic, but also more as an outworking of God's sovereign deliverance despite Samson? Yeah, not tied necessarily to that love of neighbor bit?
Yeah, I don't think he loves anybody really but himself. His first marriage, he just kind of goes home and pouts and then comes back.
Right.
So he's like, I thought you hated her. And so, yeah, it's just God, I think, despite Israel. And interesting, at the end of Jephthah, there's a civil war again. So civil war kind of happens at the end of Gideon, and it then goes to Jephthah. And Jephthah's killing of the Ephraimites is one of the biggest losses that are in that passage. And they were the ones at the beginning of the book with Ehud that were fighting off the Moabites. So it's kind of a sad commentary that you've got, like, not only does Jephthah kill his daughter, he kills a whole bunch of Israelites. Gideon started that. Abimelech did some too. And then Samson, he doesn't really kill a lot of Israelites, but he doesn't really do any deliverance.
Right. It's almost like the people he kills, the things that he does, he's not at all motivated by any sort of deliverance of anybody. It's like, these people are bothering me, and now I'm going to do this extraordinary feat, and this just happens to move in the direction of God's deliverance.
Right.
It's coincidental almost.
Yeah. And he doesn't even know when the Spirit leaves him, when his eyes get gouged out. And so I think that's a significant commentary on the sad state of his heart, that here he's got all this power that he can't even tell when the Lord leaves him.
So when we're thinking about love of neighbor within the book of Judges, maybe here's my question. When I read the Gospels and I see the question being posed to Jesus, which is the greatest commandment, and then you get that part where it's like, well, then who is our neighbor? Right. I think the way I've understood that is you go back to Leviticus and you see within Leviticus 16, I think I'm getting that right, that we have, one command to love our neighbors ourselves that's related to fellow Israelites, and one command that is to love our neighbors ourselves related to the sojourners living among us.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so it seems to me that within the Gospels context, what we're really getting is, were we just talking Israelites, or are we talking everybody here, Jesus? Like, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, within the book of Judges, do you see that dynamic yet? Or is the book of Judges a little bit more like maybe like what we see in 1 Samuel, where David throughout the book generally stays away from harming Israel? As close as he gets is Uriah the Hittite, who arguably is more of a true Israelite than David is in that instance.
Right.
But he's still, it's emphasized as a Hittite. So I'm wondering how that plays itself out in the book of Judges.
Americans have a big healthcare problem. Over 100 million U.S. citizens carry medical debt. But that's not the whole story. With health insurance, your out-of-pocket and monthly costs are way too high. You get surprise bills, denied claims, and poor customer service. That's a serious burden. As Christians, we don't have to pay for a broken system. Christian Healthcare Ministries is an alternative to health insurance at half the cost. You can enroll at any time and join a proven, faith-based solution that's both reliable and affordable. CHM isn't just help, it's financial and spiritual support when you need it most. Families across the country count on CHM to step in during their hardest moments. And it works. Stand up to health insurance with a low-cost, biblical solution. Join CHM today by visiting chministries.org/wellness. That's chministries.org/wellness.
Faith shapes how we live, and it should shape how we steward our money too. That's why 316 Financial exists. We're an online bank created to help people align their finances with their faith and their values. At 316 Financial, 10% of our profits are given back to faith-based ministries, supporting work that makes a lasting difference. It's a simple idea. Everyday banking can be a powerful way to live generously, and you don't have to sacrifice quality to bank with purpose. 316 Financial offers offers modern online banking, no monthly fees, free ATM access nationwide, and competitive interest rates designed to help your money grow responsibly. Whether you're saving for the future, managing everyday expenses, or looking for a bank that reflects what matters most to you, 316 Financial makes it easy to bank with intention. Learn more and open an account today at bank316.com. Banking services are provided by 316 Financial, a division of Primis Bank, member FDIC.
Yeah, so Judges is unique because, not entirely unique because there's continuity, but Judges is about the failure of Israel to prioritize Yahweh in their worship and then eradicate the false worship and through warfare. So I think what happens is in that promised land, Canaanite worship is not allowed. And so we only really see Rahab who converts in that time period of the conquest and settlement. And but it does show the heart that if you convert, you're fine. But to apply it to Israel, going like other nations, if you're in the Israelite land and you're worshiping other gods, then you have put yourself under God's wrath, and so you should be eradicated. Okay. So, so when you're looking at Canaanites, at least from a Deuteronomistic reading, applying Deuteronomy type thinking and Pentateuch to the text, then those people, if they're not showing any desire towards conversion to Yahwehism, then they're up for death penalty, being in God's sacred land and sacred space. Yeah. When you go outside of the land, things are different. And I actually think in the Gideon story, it's not entirely clear, but it seems questionable or at least ambiguous when Gideon goes really far outside of the promised land to go and defeat the Midianites. At that point, they're fleeing. They're not Canaanites. They're not a threat. So to me, it seems like, and God's not speaking at that point either in the text, it seems like he's gone too far beyond, because they're not a threat anymore. And so I don't think he needed to go that far. I could be wrong. There's not much in the text that would suggest what he did was right, other than he had success. It could be that he was right. It doesn't really seem very
It is a little ambiguous.
Yeah, it's a little ambiguous, and I lean towards it doesn't fit well with the laws on warfare.
So if we were to just to give people handles, and I don't think these are, the most accurate categories maybe, but what we're looking at really is if Joshua is the conquest, Judges is more like dealing with the settlement or the tail end of the conquest somehow. Like how would we describe that?
Yeah, so in the book of Joshua, you have like several areas that are kind of getting conquered or taken over, but there's still a lot that needs to be defeated. And so the Israelites are needing to extend into other areas in their warfare, but it's mostly them starting to settle. But the text does say like there's going to be warfare in there because Joshua ended, there's still much land, and Judges says, go out and extend the land. And a huge motivation is about worship. I actually think the book's more about worship than warfare. I think warfare is a manifestation of proper worship in that context. But and so, I'm a minority.
No, I mean, I get where you're coming from with that. So maybe is this what you mean by that? Maybe I should I'll ask the question. So because you're in the land and this is supposed to be sacred to the Lord, devoted to the Lord, the warfare is a mechanism by which we get false worship out of the land so that we can engage in true worship of the Lord. Now, even though that never exactly works itself out, especially that latter part, what we see in the warfare is this attack on idolatry. And
Right.
in some interesting way, I mean, how does that play out in those back portions of Gideon, where is he not addressing some of the idolatrous practice of the Israelites in that moment and then just taking it too far? So in other words, it's like he's choosing to engage in something that is not worshipful, using warfare in a way that is not worshipful in attacking his fellow Israelites. Is that kind of how you'd explain it?
Yeah, he's just they just weren't on his side 100%. They weren't helping him. And so it's very interesting at the beginning of the book. After there's a long list of, hey, you in chapter 1, there's a long list of like battle areas, conquest and not. And the angel of the Lord, the messenger of the Lord, let's say, says, you have not obeyed my voice, and it's related to worship.
Yeah.
You've not kept, it's like you haven't done these worship things. And so the Israelites their crime is they didn't align with Gideon to give him provisions. He didn't say anything about worshiping the Lord. Okay. And then Gideon, like in that section at the beginning of Judges, it's like you're supposed to tear down the sacred sites. That's their crime. And what does Gideon do? He erects something that's to the Lord, but not the way the Lord would want it. Just like Gideon worshipped the Lord in a desecrated manner, which Deuteronomy says is like the Canaanites. So Gideon, making this cultic ephod, which is some sort of auricular, like an oracle thing, which is you get your oracles from a prophet. You get it from the Urim and Thummim. That's in Samuel a good bit.
Yep.
That's it. Those are your options from the Lord, and he's doing it like kind of his own way. And so again, he didn't do warfare with the Israelites like God said. God says when you hurt a city, you tear it down or destroy it. It's because they're acting in false worship, and that's not what happened.
Yeah. In this case, they're just not aligning with him. It's an act of, I need to be in control of this whole thing. And if you're not with me, you're against me, as opposed to reading that through a more covenantal framework and saying, no, if you're engaged in right worship, maybe some of the things I'm doing are aberrant.
Right. And who knows what their worship was? I'm guessing it wasn't the greatest, but we don't know.
Right. But,
So,
that makes more sense. I get, I like that a lot. I think that framing actually works really, really well. So
thank you.
Let me ask one sort of last question. So most of my work has been really more on the First Samuel side. And so you have sort of Samuel as sort of quasi the last judge, I suppose, of Israel, right? But you have this dynamic where even before, you have Eli and Eli's sons taking over, and then you have Samuel replace them. And then when the Israelites finally reach their breaking point, it's because Samuel's sons are doing these horrible things in Israel. And so the only judge that I can remember in Judges having a son take over is Gideon, correct?
Right.
It's not like a generational succession thing. It's God raises up the judge, and there isn't a genealogical linkage necessarily between who is before and who's next. How does that, for one, how does that little snippet of Gideon's son taking over for him change things? And do you see any connection between that and Jephthah sacrificing his only shot at an heir that could take over for him?
Yeah, actually, the connection between the sons and daughter, I would just say, is you start getting a theme with Gideon of progeny dying out. Yeah. So you've got like all his sons but one. Basically, it's like his whole line is wiped out because this one acted unlawfully and and killed 70 brothers. Abimelech actually acts instead of like a judge. He's actually a mashal, which is a ruler. He's actually given the title of like kind of a king. And then he also is more of an oppressor than a deliverer in the story. He fits that role.
Yeah.
So you see the children dying off. You end up, I think, so at the end of Judges, some people say there's no king in Israel refers to there's no king but even Yahweh. It's a popular evangelical view. But I think it also is there's no physical king.
Yeah.
I think that the plain reading there is an accurate reading. And so I think it's showing the chaos. There's no dynastic succession. And the person writing is, whenever they're writing, they've seen good and bad kings. There's only 8 good kings in Israel's history. So even despite all problems with monarchy, it still is a better option than like the wild west, so to speak. There's no successor. These people aren't really functioning well. They're not making Yahweh center or caring about the things of God and loving their neighbors very well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that 1 Samuel 12, where Samuel goes back and eventually tells the Israelites that they're going to get a king. What I've always found fascinating is he basically says, yeah, you can have your king, but the problem remains the problem you've always had. Like, because he says, if you will fear the Lord and keep his commandments, all will go well with you. But now your king also has to do that too. And so you're not changing the game here. You're just rearranging the pieces on the board. Putting someone in this role doesn't solve the problem. Like, you all have the same obligations and responsibilities you always had. Now you just have a king over you, right? And so I think you're right. I mean, I think that they're struggling with this idea of the chaos reigns, and some of that has to do with there's no king over Israel. And maybe at the end of Judges, like the way I would tend to read that last line isn't not even the Lord is the king. What I was sort of always thought was it was gesturing toward more of a messianic push, right? You have this projection toward like there is a ruler who can fix so much of this. It's not about shifting from a no kingship to kingship, and we think the shift in governance is going to help us. But it's more like there's a projection toward that messianic king. I don't know how you feel about that, but
I think if you have that Christological push, there's no deliverer like the Lord Jesus Christ.
Right.
Like we see all these human deliverers are just, but even the best of them are flawed in some way or need assistance from a helper. It's Deborah and Barak that deliver. And so I think when we read, always looking to the fact that we have this divine human, the Lord Jesus Christ, that is the solution. I think is a solid read.
Yeah, because even if you wanted to go to like a David or a Solomon, you sort of have to admit that as faithful as they were, they got their problems. I mean, Solomon basically did everything that Samuel said a king would do. And he wasn't saying that in glowing terms. And so you kind of sit back and you're like, okay, that's what it was.
Right.
Well, this has been really good. We're kind of coming close to the end of time here. You've done a lot of work in the book of Judges. What do you think, just, for everyday Christian approaching the book of Judges, any advice on how to approach it or what message to really look for as they read it? What's a recurring theme that would help them get their hands around this book?
Yeah. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. So I think if you read it so the author and the way he narrates, he doesn't say, oh, by the way, this is wrong. So the book is written really interestingly. It's written, if you know the law, you'll be able to interpret it well because you'll see the incongruities. So it's almost like he who has ears to hear, let him hear. The trouble with us as New Testament, more oriented with Christians, we don't know those laws too well. So just don't take it as, oh, this happened. No, the narrator didn't say anything bad about it, therefore it's fine or good. So kind of just look at it as it's going progressively down. Deborah and Barak, shining moment. Other than that, not shining.
Not so much.
Yeah. So, and it's God saying, this is what happens when people don't follow me. They're going to fail in their worship, their warfare. You're going to have waning leadership. It's just a disaster.
Yeah.
And mistreatment of women. So I call it the 3 W's in my L. Warfare, worship, women, waning leadership.
Waning leadership. There you go. It's 4 W's. I like it. Yeah, I mean, it's a picture of what happens when we try to run things ourselves. It's like, that's helpful. I like that. Women, warfare, worship, and waning leadership. I think I got all 4. That's great. Yeah. Well, Jillian, thanks.
It's been a joy to be here.
Yeah, it's been awesome. And this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you being on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. We'll call it quits there, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Thinking Christian. Take care, everybody. Just want to take a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on the Thinking Christian podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Want to keep God's word with you wherever you go? The King James Bible Study KJV app by Salem Media makes it easy to read, study, share, and pray daily with the timeless KJV translation. Enjoy features like offline access, audio Bible listening, smart search, and tools to highlight, bookmark, and take notes, all designed to keep your Bible study simple and organized. Best of all, it's free to download in the Google Play Store. Grow in your faith every day. Search for King James Bible Study KJV and download the app today.